Hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Simonian with the Neocon team, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for our April program series on designing well and for attending this session with Carol and Lida on mental health in the workplace. Just a couple of things before we get started. Today's session qualifies for accreditation, and certificates will be mailed to all attendees who stay on for the full session. You will receive those within 3 business days. More details on accreditation can be found on the Neocon website under programming. Also, the final 15 minutes of the session will be Q&A with Carol and Lida. If you have questions, please submit them under the Q&A tab, not the chat tab, the Q&A tab. Okay, so let's get started with a little background on our presenters. Carol Rickard-Brideau is corporate president of Little Diversified Architectural Consulting. She has 38 years in practice as an architect, and for more than a decade, her energy has been focused on the scientific basis for the relationship between architecture and human neurobiology, and the factors in the built environment that impact physical and mental health, productivity, and happiness. She is a frequently featured expert on well building design and is a current advisory board member for the International Well Building Institute, focusing on how mental health can be supported by the spaces we inhabit. Lida Lewis is Director of Interiors at Page Inc. and a firm believer that the design of space has a profound impact on physical and mental health. One of the first WELL APs, WELL faculty, and Fitwel ambassadors, Lida is an architect by training and an interior architect in practice with a strong focus on sustainability and its impact on the people in the spaces we design. She currently is part of the Global Well Mind Concept Advisory, the IWBI COVID-19 Task Force, and the ASID Codes and Standards Committee, as well as an SME reviewer for the WELL Community Standard and WELL V2. Now I'll pass the screen over to Carol and Lida.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you very much. So this session is Designing Well, Mental Health in the Workplace. Since we've just been introduced, I'll move on.
Lida, you may want to change your display setting, top left button, because we're seeing the notes pages right now. No worries.
All right. Better now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So we're going to start with a bit of a bummer, the state of mental health in 2020 and 2021. But just like It's a Wonderful Life, you're not allowed to stop watching halfway through because it does get better. So let's start with anxiety, depression, and other disorders have been part of our society more than we know and more than we have acknowledged for most of our cultural history. During the pandemic, this has become worse, with the percent of those with depressed mood doubling since 2014. If that weren't bad enough, a CDC study showed in late June 2020 that 40.9% of about 6,000 respondents who completed the survey reported an adverse mental health or behavioral health condition, and 11% had considered suicide in the last month. This pandemic has made a lot of stressors more intense and more chronic. There have been constant triggers of anticipated risk with no resolution, low civic pride, and a constant future uncertainty state. Unfortunately, most Americans say this is the lowest point in history they can remember. Thankfully, we have all started to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but this has been an incredible year. One of the ways we've seen very different changes in work is that we normally saw engagement and well-being track alongside each other. But you can see from these graphs here percentage of thriving Americans has really taken a nosedive at the same time as engagement has stayed the same or gone up. We are exhausted.
Yeah, and for most of us last March, we went to a work from home posture, or as the slide said, that's really the difference between working from home, which is really trying to do work from my dining room table during a global pandemic, racial injustice while my children are not learning and running wild. And at that time, it was maybe forever because we didn't necessarily have, see the path forward to the vaccine. So even when it works pretty well, it's not great. It hits people in different ways, of course, but you're dealing with someone who may be living alone, or somebody who's trying to work and manage children, or somebody who's just sitting at the same table every day, and every day runs into the next day and life becomes one boring long note, which seems like Groundhog Day. In addition to struggling with isolation, people are stressed by living too closely to people they used to get a break from. You know, you used to go to work and get away from your spouse. You used to go to, your children went to school, you had a little bit of a break from them. Now there's really not that buffer. I know last year I heard somebody say, last year was leap year, if you don't recall. Somebody said, this is leap year, February had 28 days, March had 50, and April had 300, because it just feels like it's the same day over and over again. And one reason why is because this is the year that we had. Just take a look at all the stuff on this screen, and it's not bad enough that we had a pandemic, a global pandemic. So the pandemic alone would have been a huge disruptor, but to have all of these things happen in the same year, almost week after week after week, another bombshell, was really, really overwhelming for most people, and understandably so. And the stress is felt differently at different levels. You'll see in the graph here, different levels of people within a company. Those who feel the most vulnerable feel it very acutely. So somebody who's a leader, even though they're still feeling stress and they're still, it's not easy for a leader necessarily more than somebody else. They know what's going on in a company. They know what the choices are. They know what the decisions are that are being made, and they know why. People at lower levels may not be in on that conversation, and it kind of leaves you to create your own scenarios. Your stress ratchets up, all the stress responses in your body go into alert, and it just increases that on a daily basis. What you'll see here is that people on the highest end of the scale tend to be people that are Gen Z, obviously frontline workers, new and or single employees, and they show an even higher percentage of struggling or just getting by. Because digital overload is real, unfortunately, and it's growing, it's climbing. You can see in this chart the increase from last March until February of this year in both meeting minutes per person and chat minutes per person, how much it's grown exponentially. Working from home tends to take more planning and more communication. So communication platforms have ballooned, therefore, and even despite chat overload, 50% of people respond to team chats within 5 minutes or less. That's an extraordinary effect. Just amazing, especially with all the stuff that we're dealing with right now, that people have the added pressure of feeling like, I've got to get back to this person. I got to respond to them immediately. It just keeps barraging people from all directions. And during the pandemic, we know that people haven't received the medical treatment that they need for health issues. There was a survey by the American Dental Association saying that there was an over 70% increase in people that are grinding or clenching their teeth during the pandemic. There's a 60% increase in stress-related dental issues like chipped teeth or cracked teeth from the pressure that people are literally carrying in their mouths. Eye doctors are seeing much more eye strain because our focal length is now just from here to our screen. We're not sitting in an area. Luckily, I am in the office, and I've got long vistas that change my eye focus, and that is actually really helpful. Same for physical therapy. We're seeing a lot more ergonomic issues because work from home, typically you're not taking the same ergonomic setup into account that you would if you were working from an office. And the CDC report that you can see up on the screen here talks about the percentage of adults with symptoms of anxiety or depressive disorder that increased from 36.4% to 41.5%. And the percentage of people reporting unmet mental health care need increased from 9.2 to 11.7%. So while the numbers of people experiencing anxiety and depression are growing, we're not able to, or we're not seeking help to treat them right now. And the stress and strain are showing, across the board.
So let's start with the first couple topics. stress and burnout. So stress in itself is not bad. One type of stress that's not too bad is acute stress. It's immediate, it's in the moment, and it, evolutionarily speaking, it was essential to our survival. You are here because your ancestors ran away from the bear and the saber-toothed tiger. It's a good thing. Episodic stress is another kind of stress. This is not as great. It comes from a situation that makes the acute stressors more frequent. So if you're a type A personality, this might fit the bill for you. You may have a friend who's always late, maybe someone who's very, very disorganized. It generally springs from disorder, chaos, and disorder and chaos that, while cyclical, isn't constant. Constant comes in when we talk about chronic or ambient stress. This is unrelenting. It could be related to poverty, racism, abusive relationships, which could be emotional or physical, perhaps even a pandemic. It can be stopped, but there's larger, more systemic factors at play, and we're just not built for this kind of stress. So stress turns into burnout when we have chronic, unrelenting, unresolved stress, which causes mental tension and physical tension. Allostatic load is another definition that's helpful when we talk about these kinds of topics. Allostatic load refers to the cost of chronic exposure to repeated stressful challenges. Allostasis is the delicate balance between brain and body, or emotions and stress, to maintain equilibrium in the face of all these threats, or rebalance after the threat has passed. You can over-prepare, and over-preparation can bloat your system to the point of overload. And if you think about stress eating or excessive over-engineering, excessive exercising, it can stress your system or stress your system out by trying to maintain those excessive stores. But additionally, when our preparations are met with stressors against which we haven't budgeted or prepared, we can increase to the point of allostatic overload in our stress. And we are in a period of allostatic overload, where our level of chronic stress has exceeded our stores and our ability to cope. Our brains are less effective at responding to stress and threats, and this contributes heavily to burnout. So let's talk instead about resilience. You hear about this a lot, mostly in terms of climate change, but this is also just an interpersonal or intrapersonal thing. Much talk of bouncing back from difficult experiences. And when I think about this, I think about palm trees, major storms, extreme weather. All right, we bend and twist in the wind. Ultimately, largely, we stand tall in the face of adversity. People sometimes also talk about grit and endurance. Many celebrate grit, in fact. The firmness of mind we attribute to those who are stalwart in character and able to withstand the abrasive nature of stressors. And it's companion endurance, where we can just push through these stressors for a long period of time. However, without cycles of recovery, restoration, and regeneration, there is just only so much we can endure. If the hurricane never moved on, even those palm trees would eventually just give it up. We need to make sure we actively enable recovery. We need restoration, the filling back up of that well of stores that we use up in times of stress. Just like with a workout, we can't keep going forever. We are tried by circumstance and worn down by stress. This wearing down requires that we stop the chronic cycle and give opportunities to recover from allostatic overload. We must be given time, tools, and the opportunity to regenerate new stores and replenish our physical and mental well-being.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about loneliness and isolation. And Lida, what was it that you said at the beginning of our presentation about It's a Wonderful Life? It might be fair repeating it, because I know this is tough stuff. We're still in the middle, but it gets better. I promise you it gets better. So I am going to talk a little bit about loneliness and isolation. building on Lida's idea, she was talking about burnout. Harvard did a study a couple of years ago where they found that burnout in the office especially wasn't only due to the amount of workload that you have, but it was also due to a feeling of loneliness and a lack of feeling that you belong to a place or to a group. You know, we all remember junior high school where the biggest issue we had was, who am I going to sit with at lunch? You know, that's part of that sort of feeling. We want to belong. It's a really interesting paradox in this hyper-connected age. Even before the pandemic, we were sort of drifting apart. We felt like a lack of connection to one another, a lack of connection to what we were doing, maybe a lack of meaning in our day, what we were, you know, working on a daily basis. And then COVID-19 hit, and almost all corporate and social places that gave our lives rhythm and change and difference and, you know, peaks and valleys came to a halt. So where we used to talk about a third place, now we were really confined to a single place every day, and the circles that we moved in just went away, basically. So there's a big difference really between physical isolation and perceived isolation. Loneliness is really kind of a state of mind. You can be very happy and not feeling lonely by yourself, or you could be in a crowded room full of people and feel very lonely. It really comes down to the person and the kind of relationship that you want to have, which is measured against what you're currently feeling. Because humans and human connection really lies at the heart of well-being. We are made to connect with one another. From the moment that we're born, you know, a child looks into its parents' eyes, we're seeing each other through that lens. And one way that we measure a successful life is through social connection. They had good friends, they were involved in their community, somebody who's involved with other people. Almost from the moment that we evolved, we have this thing in our brain called the mirror neuron. And a mirror neuron is something that allows you, when you see somebody crying, like this image, or you see a baby laughing, do you ever find yourself, you know, getting teary or laughing, even though you really weren't exposed to whatever it is that they're laughing? That's your mirror neuron at work. And it was built to help us form community. It allows us to feel empathy for someone and for an experience that they had that we didn't even have, but we feel their emotion through it. And it allows us to feel someone's pain or joy. That's kind of how we're wired. So even when work from home works, we still have this hunger for connection, physical connection. Zoom is fine. You know, I haven't had the Zoom fatigue that a lot of other people have talked about, but I get it. You know, it's a very different experience than if you're in the same room with someone. One of my coworkers came yesterday to the office and he emailed this morning saying, I'm going to come back on a more regular basis. Not immediately, because I don't quite fit into my work clothes yet, but I got such a bump from it. Like I got such a bump just being around people. You know, you're able to read the room, you're able to take visual cues, you're able to bounce off a spontaneous moment. And that's one of those things that while we'd like to say it really doesn't matter, it really does matter. It also, what I've heard from a lot of junior people in our firm is that they don't get the kind of one-on-one mentoring that they're looking for. And there's so much nuance in the way that humans take in information from an interpersonal communication that's so different from reading it from a book or following out of a manual. Because the human brain is very sensitive to being lonely. One day of being alone has the approximate neural signature in your brain of fasting for a day. So a lack of social interaction can really create a craving similar to hunger. There was a study done of 40 participants, and half of them were put in a room without any human contact, and the other half were fasting for 10 hours. And what they found was at the end of the day, when they did their measurements, that, like I said, that neural signature in their brain, they had the same response to being alone as if they were fasting. So fasting, you know, food, which is a basic human need, tells us that interaction, that craving for connection is also a basic human need, and it's really important. Because loneliness doesn't only alter behavior, but it shows up in measurements of stress in our bodies. The body of a lonely person or someone who feels that they're lonely is very different from a body of someone who doesn't feel that they're lonely. Loneliness can result in changes in the brain structure. It shrinks the nerve cells in the brain. Lonely people have a higher incidence of chronic inflammation, which is kind of an unfortunate building block to a lot of long-term diseases like rheumatoid arthritis or Alzheimer's or heart disease. People who are lonely take longer to fall asleep, and they have less sleep effectiveness, which means they don't stay asleep as long and they don't go through the restorative cycles that Lida was talking about earlier in the presentation. And that impaired sleep really diminishes the restorative process and that overall resilience that Lida was talking about. And loneliness increases the levels of stress hormone, cortisol, in our bodies, which results in reduced immunity and higher blood pressure and even potentially cardiovascular disease as well. We know that loneliness is a really important risk factor, as important a risk factor as obesity and smoking. So if you were to say you got a smoking habit and you smoke 13 cigarettes a day, that would be the approximate toll that the feeling of loneliness takes on your body. We know it's especially important for an aging population as well. The lack of social connection is one of those things that unfortunately accounts for degradation of life and physical health. So what we're trying to do, how do we address loneliness? You know, how do we create spaces and workspaces to help mitigate it? A really well-designed workspace, whether it's at home or in the office, can help create a concept that we call foundational health. And foundational health is something that allows you to increase mental and physical resilience so that it's harder for chronic disease to settle into a body.
All right, so now plot twist, we're gonna get better.
Dun, dun, dun.
So we want to start with some of the actual things that you can find in the well building system. So there's a whole category that we're thinking of as fostering mental resilience. And examples are here on the screen. Just to talk about one, you can have physical activity opportunities in the space. So that can provide just complimentary, free, easy to take up, easy to do in the middle of the workday, short physical activity opportunities that are good across a spectrum of abilities. Another section has a lot of, and we could list a number of things under here, about managing risk and creating organizational resilience. So again, just a few examples of those. You can do an emergency preparedness plan. So you could develop an emergency management plan around your suppliers, around phone chains of how you connect with everybody, what really does happen if you experience any number of emergencies. And you can generally support movement and comfort, including in work from home. You can look at, for example, active furnishings, discouraging prolonged sitting and sedentary behaviors. Even just a simple cardboard box makes it so that you can stand up at your workplace. So just think you're creative about all the different things that you could do to just encourage just simple movement. We're not talking about exercise necessarily, although that's great. Simple movement into your day. So then we also wanted to share about making it work in real life, actually realizing design support strategies for all of this. There's a whole host of things that Carol and I could talk about here. There's things around acoustics, air movement. You can look at nutrition. You can look at material health. What are the views, sensory and stimulus control? But we really just tried to pull out some very specific examples, so we won't hit all of these.
But starting in an early part of a process, an integrative design process is a really important piece, not only to get everybody sort of on the same page and walking in the same direction, but it's important to bring people into the discussion. It's, I can't tell you how much I've learned about by having a large cross section of a company in a visioning session, not just the leadership. Leadership's great and they understand where a company's going, but to talk with people that are experiencing, where the space, they're just basically making do with the space. The space isn't helping their mission, helping what they do on a daily basis. By having folks like that in a visioning session, not only do you learn as a designer, but you're saying to those people, your voice matters, you're an important person and a part of this process. And what I found is that it changes people's mentality to, it's not being done to me as part of change management, it's really being done with me. I'm helping this process, I'm helping it along. And that voice allows, I think, people to create that mission, for the project. And what you see up here on the board this is before we did things in virtual space and went to Miro and Mural. This is an actual hand drawing and a way that we sort of document. We have a graphic documentation way of capturing the ideas that come out of a brainstorm session around visioning. But this piece is really important and it's too often, unfortunately, overlooked.
Yeah, that's great. We all love, as visual thinkers, I think the visual representation of the process. It helps us stay true to the vision. You can also we've done surveys. So we did a survey here in our office where we asked opinions on several major well-being themes. This is required by the well building standards. So if you're pursuing certification, you'll see this. But one of the great ways to get people to say what they need is to ask. And surveys give a chance for those who are more introverted or not as ready to stand up and talk in front of everybody else, a chance to respond. And really, those answers can help direct your design process. I mean, here, a lot of the people that I would have normally talked to were all in private offices, but because we opened up the survey a little more, we saw that there is more of a problem with interior noise, specifically from other office occupants, that we did need to address. I'm sure, and this was at the very beginning of the pandemic when we were actually all working from home, so it was people's memory of the office. And now that we'll be back on more Zoom calls and everything, we've really made this an intense focus of this particular project. So this can help direct exactly where you need to target various different well-being themes.
So movement is another well-being theme. And I know my friend Carol Sandman is on the line. She's someone who we worked with on the projects in the center and on the right-hand side of the screen. But it can be what you see in the center and the right-hand side of the screen. In the center, that's actually a hula hoop wall. This is a project that was done in California where the weather is blessed all the time. And you've got the option of taking a hula hoop and going outside. On the right, you see a jump rope wall. Again, those are kind of extreme examples of how to get people up and people moving. It can be very simple. On the very left-hand side of the screen, you'll see in another well space, just a really nice stair. A stair that's featured more prominently, and it's in a way that it invites people to take it rather than taking the elevator. So we know that why this is important, especially to mental health, is we know that neurogenesis happens when people exercise. It needs to be an extension of their natural day and their natural movements, because I'll speak for myself, if I got to do anything special to exercise, I'm not going to do it. So make it easy for me to be active. Don't put a garbage can at my desk. Make it so that I've got to get up and take my garbage to a central location. But tell people why you're doing that. I've also had that happen where people just, one day people's garbage cans disappear. And they're like, can you imagine this is happening? It's like, okay, there's a reason why it's happening. It's trying to get you up and out of your chair and get you moving, because we know that being active on a regular basis actually creates more neurons in the hippocampal region of the brain, which is associated with memory and cognition. So those are really important factors. And there are lots of ways that you can help people just get a little bit more active in space as a natural extension of what they do and how they use their office.
Yeah, another example of that is just simply making it visible. I know you can't get these bikes down from the wall, but you would still be thinking about biking and, oh, look, we removed the barriers. There's a bike right there that you could go take and get lunch just a little bit farther away today, maybe. Or just wrap it into fun things, or even just opportunities to take a different posture throughout the day. All of these things will help. Another thing that you can look at is design with nature. So this is an active planning document, or two active planning documents, where we're actually looking at, our biophilic interventions. We've done a lot with materials as well, and even space design, but this is literally just planning what plants will be best where, how can we make sure everybody can see one, planning for the light exposure needed for each one. So there's different plants on different exposures, and we're even making care plans for all of our plants so that hopefully they will live. But we have a dedicated team taking care of them, and we're going to even assign zones for who takes care of what where.
And you mentioned they will live. You can actually also just images of nature. Anything that's big enough for you to project yourself into has the same response. Your body has the same response because we've got this mind-body connection. We were hunter-gatherers. That's how we evolved in Africa. And we have this mind-body connection to nature. Nature calms us down. Nature lowers our blood pressure. Nature increases our heart rate variability. It lowers stress hormones in our body. A static light bulb, I'm pointing to one over my head, is only about 140 years old. Our bodies have really been ruled by, nature and being out in nature as we did the hunting and gathering on a daily basis. So it could be as simple as literally have plants in the space, like on the left-hand side. And what I was pulling when Lida said keeping them alive, you can also have moss walls. I mean, a moss wall doesn't have to be alive, but it has the same effect on your body. On the right-hand side, we try to repurpose poplar, actually it's poplar, pieces of poplar trees that were being cut down for a greenway that was being created local to this well-certified project. And it's one of those things where we were able to use something that was local to the project itself. It's one of those things where as you walk underneath it, the light that's over it kind of filters through and simulates what's called a natural analog. So it's almost like light through the tree branches, light through leaves, movement in space, etc. We know that being in nature or around nature for as little as 5 minutes restores both physical and mental energy. Really important. It's one of those things that can help you decompress if you've had, a stressful conversation or an interaction or phone call or meeting or whatever. Being around nature, being around natural materials, natural elements helps to calm our bodies down and helps get us back to that sort of decompression stage.
And I love that dappled and diffuse light concept too. After I went to a hotel in Miami, that the lobby was actually just all white everything everywhere, but palm trees also inside that were uplit from everywhere. I came home and got a light for my parlor palm so that it will shine all the same light up on my ceiling and across the wall. And man,
yeah.
It's pretty cool.
And that's a simple thing, right? But it makes a difference.
So in this slide, we're going to talk about materials, but it's also a bridge from biophilia, looking at, as Carol was mentioning, some images of artwork. Of plants. It's also just materials that have that organic flow or remind you of patterns from nature or don't stay the same over time. But here you can also look to well-being for what is in these materials. So you can start tracking things like NSF and ANSI certifications, gold certifications for green label. You can look at declare lists, even better, because then you're really stripping down what could be in those materials and be all around you. I know every firm is experimenting with how we do this, but the more and more we look at the baselines for what we allow in spaces, and that goes for the physical materials that we're designing and installing, but also the materials you use in operations and for cleaning, making all of the staff aware of the different VOCs and emissions that can come from the things they bring in from home. All of that is a concerted effort to make a healthier space that will support you. And when we look at some of those materials applied, you can see that sort of integration of biophilia and materials that show wear and tear. I love, if anybody hasn't looked up rammed earth housing, Paige Lovely did a great one here on the right, but it's an amazing material that maybe someday when I retire, I'll have a rammed earth house just because it's way too cool.
But the texture in that is just amazing. Like it's amazing and gorgeous. Yeah, exactly. And that's appealing to human nature. Like that's part of your brain. That's part of your evolutionary imprint.
Absolutely.
So we talk about light, and by light, I really mean daylight. As I was saying a minute ago, the static light bulb's only about 140 years old, but daylight's really important because our brain has something in it called the Suprachiasmatic Nucleus, or SCN, and it's a little button that runs our whole body. It's kind of a master clock. Each of your major organs has its own master organ, but the circadian rhythm, the suprachiasmatic nucleus in your brain, runs your entire body. When we were out hunting and gathering, we spent most of our time outside. We had no problem for natural access to daylight, or regular access to natural daylight rather, but we do now. And what's bad about that is that the circadian rhythm runs our body. It tells our hormones rise and fall during the day. Different factors in our body do the same thing based on where the sun is in the sky. And the suprachiasmatic nucleus can read the color temperature of light. It's not easy to do necessarily with the naked eye, but morning light is blue in color. The SCN reads that, gives your body a shot of cortisol. You're up out the door and on your way for the rest of the day. Evening light is yellow in color. Your SCN reads that, gives you a shot of melatonin. And your body starts to decompress and prepare for rest and restoration, the way that Lida was talking about early. So everybody needs access to natural light and natural daylight on a daily basis. So when we're designing spaces, trying to keep built environment near the core or sequester it in a way that there's still wide expanses of glass, allowing light to bounce through a space. The image that you see in the top right corner there is not a double exposure. It's actually just showing melanopic lighting that essentially mimics the color temperature of natural daylight during the day. We've gotten so sophisticated now. We've got artificial ways of providing natural things. But it's extraordinarily important, and it's really a social equity thing too. Remember when you think back to when you were growing up, the boss's office had the corner glass because they had the views and they had the daylight. It's become a social equity thing because everybody deserves that access to daylight. Everybody deserves to have their body run the way that they need to. If not, then it results in sleep disruption. Sleep disruption is, again, the foundation for a lot of really bad, chronic, unexpected diseases like obesity and type 2 diabetes and heart disease and even certain cancers. So natural daylighting is really important as a foundational measure for mental health and physical health.
And when we look at the spectrum of workplaces that people can be at, I mean, the corporate is a little bit more turned inside out from that earlier model of all the bosses having the window line. But if you look at airports or you look at healthcare, or you look at a lot of different places, there's one standard for the visitors and another for the workers. So really starting to look at, and Carol's totally right, Mother Nature, nobody does it better than Mother Nature. She has it down with the best lighting possible, but where you can't, it's really awesome to be able to use, whether it's the image in the upper right of lighting that does tune throughout the day, or if hopefully you have people who are working and then being able to go home and sleep where shift work isn't an issue, you can really look at color tuning your light itself. It doesn't tune throughout the day, but you can look at the spectrum emitted by the light and carefully select lights that not only reduce glare control or reduce glare incidence, and have high color rendering index, but also are tuned to, okay, if when we're here, it's truly is 9 to 5 and we're awake, let's at least make sure that the lighting that we have that's static has the end of the spectrum that would make us more sleepy, corrected out.
Right. So another cool thing that we have in our brains are amazing machines, and they're so amazing that computer scientists are actually studying them to see how they can make computers more like the human brain because they're extraordinary. But we have this thing called a novelty neuron, and a novelty neuron sounds like just what it sounds like. You want to be surprised from now and then. You want to be delighted from now and then. It's one of those things that keeps us active and engaged, and something that's unexpected or interesting or novel or changeable. The other piece of it is that humans like to have control. You might have noticed. We as designers, double time do we want control, but that's a different issue. That's a different presentation. But something that is able to be changed around, something that's unexpected, something that allows you to make it your own, quote unquote, is one of those things that brings us happiness, brings us delight. Looking for those unexpected things within that you can place within a space, and then move them, because once you're there and you've seen it once, it gets old after a while. So constantly think about ways that you can surprise and delight people that are using the spaces that you're designing. Really important.
I met a designer once at one conference they had in their office a secret society of fun. And I love that idea.
What did the Secret Society of Fun do?
They would have challenges and a small budget every month, and the society changed its members periodically, very deliberately, that they were just supposed to bring some element of fun to the office, and that was their only directive.
Love it. I love it.
Every month it was something different.
And I bet it was as fun for the people who were doing it, maybe even more fun for them than it was for the people experiencing it. That's fantastic. Great idea.
So acoustics, this definitely affects our mental health. So what you'll see whenever you look at the WELL building standard is it's going to push you and encourage you to really do sound planning. And we tend to do something we call sound and privacy planning. Just like the MEP engineers will take a floor plan and look at zoning, let's actually zone and say what spaces, for example, on the acoustic plan, you see what spaces are quiet and accessible to all. There are spaces that are quiet and claimed, so they aren't necessarily accessible. And where are our planned spaces where you actually can be loud? And that can tell a lot to the team behind the scenes, all the different people incorporated in making these projects work. And when you're working with a client, what actually are our expectations for these different spaces? So we can manage sound barriers, we can manage sound masking, we can really see, okay, these are the things that we know are going to be persistent disruptive noise sources. And very closely aligned to that is privacy. Where are we is a group going to be able to have privacy? Where is an individual going to be and have privacy. And sometimes when you do these maps, you see that it's only the restrooms where they will be able to have privacy. So it's a big clue sometimes that you just haven't provided the full spectrum of experience that's needed in a workplace. And of course, with sound and privacy planning also comes, if you've never really done it before, you can go through your manufacturers and look at reverberation time calculations. So this is the reverberation calculation that I got back for this space. It does take a lot of sound absorbing material to make the spaces really perform optimally. But we've already been up there during construction and can say there's a major difference between our 7th floor and 8th floor, and we're really looking forward to it.
So I talked a little earlier about social isolation and loneliness and how pervasively negative it was on an ongoing basis or regular basis for people. So what that means is how do we start designing spaces that help to build community? A lot of it is by creating a variety of spaces. You know, we've talked about alternate work settings for years, but we need to think about alternate community settings as well. Creating a variety of spaces that allow the user to decide how involved or not they want to be. Sometimes people want to be in the middle of things. You can see a coworker of mine looking at a 3D model in the middle of a social space in our Charlotte office. But also there are sometimes people who want to be right nearby, maybe not in the center of things, but they want to be near activity. They want to see what's going on. You can see on the left-hand side of the space, you can literally see kind of what's going on in the space, even though you don't have to be in that conference room. You can see because of the glazing that there's activity, there's people, there are other people near you. You can just, in a really informal way, kind of get some energy from seeing other people and the activity that may be going on in other places. But creating space that's got a variety of uses, that's comfortable, that's restorative, that helps people decompress or engage as they want to.
And there's all kinds of these spaces flowing throughout all of our designs, which I know we all appreciate and love. The line between residential and hospitality and workplace is blurring even further and will into the future. So spaces like these, again, as Carol said, where you can be off to the side of the action, you can be in the action, activated by corridors and spaces that go past it to make sure that they always have new life introduced. Really looking forward to designing these spaces.
Another concept in the well building standard is the concept of nourishment. And I probably don't need to tell you that food plus drink equals magic for humans. So anytime there's food or anytime there's, a place to sit and share food or really just sit down with somebody, have a cup of coffee, it's one of those things that's really important. Now, the well standard itself wants you to make good food choices, not just a whole bunch of soda and chocolate and sugar, but creating places like that also helps create that community feel, creating a place where people want to sit down and, even just have a glass of water, something simple where they're talking to somebody, really helps expand that repertoire of different types of spaces that can create that community feeling.
Yeah, making more interested in sticking around if there's something there to nibble on too. And for that reason, because I'm always looking for that, I do look forward to healthy snacks, because otherwise I'd be in real trouble.
And then importantly, as important as all the design that you've already seen is kind of the back end of it. What are the metrics? How do we know that what we're designing is meeting the needs of the people we're designing for? Part of that is creating a user's manual. Crazy idea, right? But that's a really important piece of change management. When people say, well, I don't need change management, that makes no sense. I know what I'm doing. We're good with this. We got this. No, you always overlook something because you already know too much. You know the design, you know why you're doing it. Not everybody else does. And part of the well building standard, part of the power of it is it's a teaching tool. It helps people understand the choices that they're making can have a pervasive negative long-term effect on their health or a positive long-term effect on their health. That's super important because each person who learns more about it can spread that, and it grows and grows and grows. Really important. So what you're looking at right now is actually part of a user's manual that showed the population in that space where biophilic elements were and why they mattered, what they were about, why we chose them, how they affected people, and where they were. And then likewise surveying people. So what you're seeing right now is a survey from a well building space that we did for our office in Charlotte, North Carolina. And you can see some of the quotes on the side. People knowing that they're in a well-designed space or well-certified space becomes really important. Not only are there hard metrics, you know, like we're using less energy, we're using less water, but we're also seeing the mental health effects of people knowing that they're in a space where an employer or, you know, whoever's designing a well space has cared enough to create a space that will be better for them in their long term for their health. It's really important. It's an important message to convey to people. And it's really a responsibility that I think as designers, we owe to the people that come in contact with the spaces that we design every day. It's great to have a building that you're proud of and that you think is, you know, gorgeous. That's one facet. We design for people. We're designing for humans. We're trying to create a human workplace so that people can do their work, lower the stress from their environments, do great work, because human health isn't really just the absence of design. It's about creating an environment where people can do the best possible work and perform at their highest possible abilities, period.
I love getting these kinds of metrics. You know, every day is such an experiment for us as designers, and we never really, or seldom, I should say, stop to see, did it actually work?
Right.
So it's lovely to get this kind of feedback. Hopefully this will be part of the new normal.
So let's go to Q&A. I think people have put some questions in there. There's one that says, Allison says, are corporate real estate organizations starting to consider eating disorders and health at every size when considering food offerings and communications as well as movement? Lida, you want to take that one? I know you've got an answer for that, as far as the nutritional value of the food that's in a space.
Sure. Well, I mean, yeah, I think the message of healthy at every size is definitely one that is starting to permeate, because you just can't prejudge somebody's circumstances. There's all kinds of reasons, and there are people who are healthy at a higher weight and unhealthy at a lower weight. That's a major reason why Well changed their concept from fitness to movement, because it's partly an acknowledgement of that it's really, we're just trying to get people moving throughout the day, and it's called nutrition again for a reason. And it's getting the healthy choice to be an easy and available choice, and not really dictating to people what they can eat or where they should do it. But if you make things available that are, and it's not just the calorie count or sugar, it's also do you have alternatives to allergen laden things? There's all kinds of things that people are allergic to. And if we can be a little bit more mindful when we're selecting the food, we can make it so that everybody really feels included. And it's a big part of inclusion.
And actually, Lida and I were talking about one of the things a lot of times in the well building standard itself and getting certification that people kind of freak out about is having healthy fruits and vegetables available. A lot of times we've had clients go, whoa, there's no way we can possibly provide healthy fruits and vegetables. And it's like, that's okay. You don't have to sweat it. There's no prescribed amount. You don't have to have some for each person necessarily. I mean, there just has to be an assortment of stuff that's there. And you still fulfill that requirement. But it is about turning people on to healthier snacks, or at least understanding what they're doing to their body when they're consuming sugar, which is my personal peccadillo is sugar. Sugar is the best. Yeah.
Yes, you don't have to buy an orange for everybody, but you can definitely. And there's things like dried fruit, nuts. We see sometimes. How am I going to be able to leave this out? I don't have a chilled glass front refrigerator. Dried nuts, seeds, those help.
Right. So always remember, we put a man on the moon, so there's probably a pretty high probability we can figure this out. Another question, are you seeing big trends on how office designs are changing due to the pandemic and concerns for safety? Lida, do you want to hit this one first, or you want me to go?
Sure. I mean, I think we're seeing, as we all are seeing this still evolve. We've definitely realized of late that surface transfer fomite transfer wasn't quite as intense as it needed to be for some of the overreaction at the beginning. I loved the hygiene theater articles that came out towards the beginning there, with people who were really in the cleaning and control. And obviously we are seeing a lot more buildings look at their filtration systems. Retro commissioning. Incidents of people asking for retro commissioning is up, and looking at in that process, what level of filters can we really put back into this space? But some of the challenges really are HR and just mindset related. And I think it's an important question. It's starting to be an important question for a lot of people who are realizing we made everybody leave the space because it's unsafe. So now what do we do? And it doesn't have to be a full redesign, but what do we do? Are there even just special care packages we can have or something to make people want to come back? Because that is the big trend, is how do we now make this a destination workplace, a space that people want to come to? Because now it's not just that you have to, we have to answer why would you come here?
And I did hear a lot of people early on in the pandemic. Again, we had no idea what was going on and how big this elephant was as we were feeling it, with our own hands blind. But I heard a lot of people saying, great, I'm going to cut my space in half. It's kind of like, yes, but no. What we are seeing is the potential for maybe a reduction in space, maybe 20 to 30%, as much as 30%. That to me seems a little bit wild, but a change in the way that we create space. So a lot more community spaces, a lot more collaboration spaces. It's very possible, if you think after 9/11, how we let go of a lot of the privacy concerns that we had before, because we felt we were getting more security by giving up some of those things. Same thing here. We are probably going to be allowing people to work more outside the workplace as well as inside the workplace. So we've got to be able to have that type of hybrid space that allows people, when they're coming to the workspace, to be able to collaborate with people, because they're coming, it's kind of becomes a resource center, right? You're coming there because you want to use the copier, you got to use certain things, you got to have certain meetings, you want to collaborate with people. So creating that type of platform space where you can collaborate with people easily, get a quick meeting room, the space will be shifting purposes to a large extent. Perhaps a lot more hoteling. But the biggest thing that I'm hearing is the way that we're using space and how we shift that.
I'll agree with the hoteling too. I do see a lot more people. At first, there was kind of a reaction of, we don't like to touch each other's stuff now. Why would we do hoteling? But as people get more and more aware of cleaning and the different policies that you can enact, and you can have conversations with your cleaning crew. I don't know if you've ever asked who cleaned your conference rooms in between meetings, but spoiler alert, nobody did. So to some extent, some hoteling stations, if you pair that with an intensive cleaning policy, can really launch us forward into the alternative-based working. Of course, where it's client appropriate and their actual work appropriate, but those who are ripe targets for our alternative-based working are much more open to that concept now.
And by bringing that up, Lida, another, actually a good thing that might come out of the pandemic, most of my meetings that were an hour long have gone to 45 minutes, so that people have a, what's the euphemism is bio break, but so you can go to the bathroom. So now we're talking about, when we come back to the office, are we going to try to keep that 45-minute limit? I think it's a great idea, because it also allows a little bit of the air to be exchanged between groups, so that you're not just stacking people and breathing the same air in the same space, group after group after group. So if that would be something that would carry over after the pandemic, I would be a very happy camper. Oh, so yes. Another question, are you seeing or involved in any design projects that are more inclusive for people with disabilities? How is well addressing people with special needs if stairs or physical activity is not possible?
So we are lucky enough to work with Gallaudet on a regular basis. So there's a lot that we get taught by deaf space design and other things. I personally love paradigm shifting ideas whenever I get to talk to someone who experiences space differently than I. This is a part of the WELL standard. I don't know if there's any inclusive design experts or universal design experts out there. I'm looking for books and articles to teach me more about how to meet the intent of the WELL standard on universal accessibility, because it is going farther than ADA accessibility. I think the question of how do you address it with if stairs or physical activity isn't possible, that is a focus of when you look at some of the whether it's the WELL standard, Fitwel, other things. When you're offering programming, really making sure that you're keeping in mind that this isn't just for the marathon runners in the company. What is there a diverse offering in the educational programming that you're providing, and in the types of furniture and the types of postures and the meeting spaces that you have that accommodates a range of different abilities.
Another question, what are you seeing or doing in the area of cross-cultural inquiry, which they put as learning about and from others, unique lived experience when designing for belonging, inclusivity, and community. I'm thinking about the challenges to blend what unites us as humans while honoring diversity. I would say absolutely taking that horizontal slice that I talked about with including a lot of different people in visioning sessions when you're figuring, before you do programming, becomes really important, not only from understanding how the space works and doesn't work, but also understanding the culture of the place and being able to incorporate bits of culture that are unique to the people that occupy that space and occupy that company. I remember years ago talking with one group, and what we found was that they had a couple people that were really good cooks, and they all ended up having this chili cook-off twice a year, and the chili cook-off became really important. So that became part of the centerpiece that we designed their common space around. It had to have enough plugs. It had to have quad outlets so they could plug in a whole bunch of slow cookers for their chili cook-off day. But those are the things, those kind of unique things, especially now, especially after last year, especially after yesterday, being aware of social equity, being aware of the differences between us and the things that we can celebrate that are different and unique about each one of us have become so much more important over the last year that I think that asking those questions as we begin any project now in the visioning session is, how does this, when you think about regenerative design and you think about nested systems, how does this project affect the block that it sits on? How does it affect the neighborhood that it's surrounded by? How does it affect the city that it sits in, the town that it sits in? All of those things now are much more important, I think, than they were 5 years ago. And there are things that we have to be aware of trying to include in the early stages of any project.
Well said. Another question here is, does WELL address restroom design in regard to inclusivity for gender and also disabilities that have specific restroom requirements? I'll say not enough for me yet. I actually have spent a lot of time thinking about gender neutral restroom design and all kinds of different questions around restroom design. We have just launched, the IWI just launched their health equity advisory, and I was lucky enough to get a spot on that, and we will definitely be pushing that forward. I at least will be, and if you want to talk more about that, definitely get in touch with me through LinkedIn after the webinar. Carol, I'm going to give you the next one. Are you seeing that, unless you don't want to take it?
No, I'm happy to, happy to.
Are you seeing that employers are having to openly discuss mental health concerns more broadly, since this is often a topic that is not easily discussed in a work environment?
Yes, the easy answer is yes. And the detail is that I think a lot of companies have increased or made their EAP, their employee assistance program, more robust. And that's kind of a low threshold. That's if you're stressed and you don't know that you might need help, that it's someone you can talk to who says, you know what, I do think, you probably should talk with a counselor or a therapist or someone like that. I know that certain companies are spending more time now on mental health programming internally. It's not something where, to your question, you're necessarily discussing it in a large environment. Certainly you don't want to violate HIPAA or expose anyone who doesn't self-disclose. Self-disclosure is a different thing. But yes, there's a lot more focus on mental health, hence this presentation. And I think that companies are much more aware of the stresses and strains. And you guys can't see this, but there's a comment below this question that we got from an anonymous attendee saying, recently during a large Zoom call with my cross-country colleagues, after not seeing each other for most months, emotion took over, isolation and a sense of belonging that you describe at home, that we described earlier in the presentation. Absolutely. I mean, just reading that, my eyes started to sort of tear up, because I think we've all felt at one point or another overwhelmed by this past year, by whether it was working conditions or conditions, that are happening in the cities around us and the world around us. It's been extraordinary. So I think not to pay additional attention to mental health is something that would be, take at your own risk. It's not an enlightened position. It's not an aware position. And certainly I think it's a position that's important for people to point out in a very constructive way to HR departments.
We have one more.
Okay.
Gen Z reports a much higher incidence of anxiety and depression. Should employers take a different approach with them? And I would say everybody needs their own approach. There's a big difference between who reports and who doesn't report as well. So there's a lot of hidden anxiety and depression. And if, as a company, you've never looked into something called mental health first aid, I would encourage you to look into that kind of training to really help direct people to resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one last quick question with respect to products and sourcing. Are there certain places you go to learn about new products regarding wellness and biophilic design? There are a million places. Neocon, obviously a great place to do it. You've got all of the providers and manufacturers there. I think wellness and human health is really important now. People are much more aware of it. So I would say there are lots of different places. International Well Building Institute that created the well and administers the well building standard is also a really fabulous place for case studies, what's been done before, how to learn more about it, etc. And I think we're at 1.
Yep.
So thanks everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Carol and Lida, for a really important presentation. And that last question was not a plant.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't at all.
It wasn't. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We have recorded this session. It will be available on neocon.com within the next couple of days. We have 5 additional programs running as part of this Designing Well series. We have 2 this afternoon and 3 tomorrow. So we hope you'll join us for those as well. So thank you again.
Be well. Take care.
Be well.